Hello. When my fiancé insisted on a $180,000 wedding or no wedding at all, I simply canceled the plans. She lost her mind and later attempted to sabotage my promotion. In the end, that decision blew up her own life instead. My name is Gerard. I am 35 and I work as a refrigeration technician for a regional cold storage company in Eindhoven. Most of my week is spent driving between warehouses and supermarkets fixing industrial cooling units. The schedule is steady, the pay is good for the trade, and after years of doing it, I keep my finances organized because one expensive mistake in equipment can cost a company a lot of money. My fiancé is Qley, 32. We had been together a little over 3 years and engaged for about 8 months when this whole situation started to unfold. We live in my house, which I bought 5 years before meeting her, so most of the big financial responsibilities already ran through me. I am writing this because what started as a disagreement about a wedding somehow turned into something much bigger and honestly much stranger than I expected. When I first met Qley, she came across as confident and sharp. She had strong opinions about almost everything: restaurants, travel plans, furniture, clothes, even what brands of groceries were acceptable. At first I read it as personality. Some people just like things a certain way. Over time, though, I noticed a pattern. Anything modest she called embarrassing. Anything practical she called boring. She talked about things being cheap with a kind of disgust that always felt a little over the top. Still, money had never been a direct problem between us. She works as a dental lab technician making crowns and bridges for a private clinic network, and the pay there is solid. Between her income and mine, we lived comfortably. Not flashy, but stable. So when we started planning the wedding, I assumed we were approaching it the same way. Something nice, memorable, maybe a little fancy, but still grounded in reality. I had already set aside a pretty healthy budget. Enough for a good venue, a proper honeymoon, and enough left so we would not start married life under financial stress. The first meeting with the wedding planner changed everything. Qley immediately started talking about things that sounded less like a wedding and more like a luxury event package. Imported floral walls. A designer dress budget that made me blink twice. A multi-day celebration schedule for guests who had never asked for that. She kept repeating one phrase over and over. It needs to feel high-end. At the time, I figured it was just planner inflation. Big numbers that get cut down once people start thinking clearly. Then the preliminary estimate arrived in my email. Just under $180,000. I stared at the number for a solid minute because I genuinely thought there had to be a typo somewhere. That evening, I printed the estimate and sat down with Qley at the kitchen table in my house. I explained calmly that there was absolutely no scenario where I was spending $180,000 on a wedding weekend. She barely looked at the paper. Then she leaned back in the chair and said if I wanted a cheap wedding, maybe I did not want to marry her badly enough. I want to be clear about something before people assume I panicked about money. The issue was not that I could not technically afford part of it. The issue was that the number made no sense relative to the life we were building. The house we live in still has a mortgage. I have been paying it down aggressively for years because the goal was to have it mostly cleared before 40. I also keep a savings buffer because the kind of refrigeration systems I work on do not wait politely when they break. If a compressor fails in a food warehouse, it becomes a crisis immediately, and sometimes that means working odd hours or covering unexpected costs before the company reimburses things. Spending $180,000 on a wedding weekend would have wiped out most of the financial stability I had spent a decade building. So I explained all of that calmly to Qley at the table. I told her the number was unrealistic and unnecessary. I said we could still have a great wedding for a fraction of that cost. Nice venue, good food, proper celebration, but within a sane budget. She did not engage with the numbers at all. Instead, she started talking about perception. According to her, weddings set the tone for how people see a couple. If it looks cheap, people assume the relationship is cheap. If it looks impressive, people treat you differently. I remember asking a simple question. Which people? She listed co-workers, extended friends, people from her industry events, even people she had not spoken to in years, but who might see photos online. That was the moment the conversation stopped being about the wedding itself and started feeling like a performance review for strangers. I told her again that I was not spending $180,000 on a wedding. Not partially. Not through loans. Not through draining my savings. It was simply not happening. She stared at me like I had just said something offensive. Then she said something that honestly surprised me. She said if I really loved her, I would want the wedding she deserved. The wording bothered me more than the price tag deserved. I asked her directly what she thought a realistic number looked like. I even pushed my own limit higher during that conversation just to see if she was willing to meet somewhere in the middle. I suggested something around 40,000. Still a big wedding by normal standards. She laughed. Not a small laugh either. The kind that people use when they think someone just embarrassed themselves. Then she said something that made the entire situation suddenly very simple for me. She said she would rather have no wedding at all than something that looked small. When Qley said she would rather have no wedding than a smaller one, the conversation actually became very simple for me. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I just sat there for a few seconds thinking about what she had said and what it implied. Because if someone frames marriage as conditional on a luxury event, then the event is the priority, not the marriage. So I nodded and said all right. She looked confused for a moment, like she expected another round of negotiation. Instead, I told her something very straightforward. If the only wedding she was willing to have cost $180,000, then there would be no wedding. She blinked like she had misheard me. I explained it clearly. The wedding plans were canceled. I was not moving forward with deposits, venues, planners, or anything connected to that budget. For about 5 seconds, she just stared at me. Then she started talking very fast about how I was overreacting and how we had not even discussed financing options yet. Loans, contributions from family, maybe sponsorship deals from vendors she knew through work. That part actually made me more certain about the decision. I told her I was not taking loans for a wedding, and I was definitely not turning our marriage into some kind of social media brand collaboration. Then I said the part that really set her off. Since there was no wedding and the engagement was effectively over, she needed to start packing her things. Just to clarify the logistics, the house we live in is mine. My name only. I bought it long before we met. She moved in about a year into the relationship. So when I said that, I was not making a dramatic statement. I was stating the practical next step. She stood up so quickly the chair scraped across the floor. The reaction was immediate anger. She accused me of threatening her over money. Then she said I was trying to control her and punish her for having standards. I kept my tone calm and repeated the same point. There was no punishment happening. She had just told me she would rather have no wedding than a smaller one. So we were having no wedding, which meant the engagement was over, which meant we needed to separate our living situation. That logic made her even more furious. She started pacing around the kitchen saying I was bluffing and that I would calm down once I realized how ridiculous I sounded. But the truth is I had already reached clarity during that conversation. Once someone says marriage only happens if the event costs $180,000, the relationship has already told you what it is. At that point, the conversation had clearly reached the end. We were not discussing a wedding anymore. We were discussing whether the relationship itself made sense, and from my side the answer had already become obvious. Qley, however, was not processing it that way. She kept pacing around the kitchen repeating that I was being dramatic and that I would calm down once I realized how embarrassing this would look if people found out. That part actually caught my attention. Not the anger. The word embarrassing. It confirmed what I had started realizing during the planner meeting. For her, the wedding was not about us starting a life together. It was about how impressive the event would look to other people. I repeated one last time that the wedding plans were canceled and that we needed to separate our living situation. She stared at me for a few seconds like she was waiting for me to backtrack. When I did not, her reaction flipped from disbelief to pure anger. She said I had just wasted 3 years of her life. Then she said if I thought I could humiliate her like this and walk away, I was completely wrong. I did not respond to that. There was no productive direction that conversation could go. Instead, she grabbed her phone, her handbag, and her car keys off the counter. As she walked toward the door, she said something along the lines of how I would regret this once people heard what I had done. Then she slammed the door hard enough that I heard a picture frame rattle in the hallway. A few seconds later, I heard her car start outside. The house went quiet. I stood there in the kitchen for a minute, just processing how fast the entire situation had collapsed. 3 years together, 8 months engaged, and the final decision had taken maybe 20 minutes. My phone buzzed about 10 minutes later. It was her name on the screen. Then it buzzed again, and again. Calls, messages, missed calls stacking one after another. I did not even open them. There was nothing left to negotiate and nothing left to explain. She already knew exactly why the wedding had been canceled. So after about the 6th call, I blocked her number. Not out of anger. Just because I had no interest in spending the rest of the night arguing about a decision that was already final. The house was quiet after Aisley left. Not the normal quiet either. The kind where you suddenly realize how much background noise another person brings into a place without thinking about it. I walked through the kitchen and living room, just making sure nothing had been broken during the argument. Everything was still in place. Her laptop was gone and a couple of small personal things were missing, which told me she had grabbed whatever was nearby before storming out. Other than that, the house looked the same. I sat down on the couch and started thinking through the practical side of what had just happened. 3 years together means there is always some level of shared stuff. Clothes in the closets, cosmetics in the bathroom, boxes in the spare room. None of it complicated legally, but it still needs to be handled in a way that does not create more problems. My plan was simple. Give it a day or two for things to cool down. Then arrange a specific time for her to come collect everything while I was present. Clean, direct, finished. I went to bed earlier than usual that night because honestly the decision itself had drained most of my energy. The next morning I woke up to a quiet house again, made coffee, and went to work like I normally would. My job does not really allow for personal drama days. When a refrigeration system goes down in a storage facility full of frozen food, people expect you to show up and fix it. Around mid-morning my phone started buzzing. At first I assumed it was Aisley trying from a different number, but when I checked the screen, the name surprised me. It was a guy named Leon who I had met exactly twice through Aisley at some dinner event months earlier. The message said something simple. "Hey man, what the hell happened with you and Aisley last night?" I did not respond right away because I was literally standing inside a mechanical room trying to diagnose a compressor problem. 10 minutes later, another message came in, this time from one of Aisley's co-workers that I barely knew. Then another, and another. Within half an hour, I had 5 separate messages from people connected to her side of life, asking some version of the same question. That was when I realized something important. Aisley had not just left the house angry. She had already started telling people a story about what happened. And judging by the tone of those messages, whatever story she told them sounded very different from reality. At first, I ignored the messages. People tend to ask questions when they hear drama, and I was not interested in managing rumors while standing inside a freezing mechanical room, trying to keep several tons of stored food from thawing. But the messages kept coming. Around lunchtime, Leon called instead of texting. I stepped outside the facility to answer because at that point curiosity got the better of me. The first thing he said was that Aisley was telling people I had dumped her because I refused to commit to the marriage financially. According to her version, I panicked about responsibility and canceled the wedding after she had already invested months planning everything. I told him the short version of the truth. She demanded a $180,000 wedding. I refused. She said no smaller wedding was acceptable. So I canceled the whole thing. Leon went quiet for a second and then said that sounded very different from what she had been telling people. That was annoying, but still manageable. Rumors burn out eventually. What I did not expect happened 2 days later. For the past few months, I had been in the running for a promotion at work. The company was opening a supervisory role overseeing maintenance scheduling for several large refrigeration sites. It meant less field work, more coordination, and a noticeable pay increase. The final decision meeting was supposed to happen that week. Wednesday afternoon, my supervisor, Mark, called me into his office. His expression already looked irritated, which immediately told me something was wrong. He asked me a question that made absolutely no sense at first. "Do you know someone named Aisley?" I said yes. She was my ex-fiancée. Then he turned his monitor toward me. There was an email open on the screen. The sender was Aisley, and the email was addressed directly to the company's general operations inbox. In that message, she claimed I had serious anger issues, that I had threatened her during a domestic argument, and that someone with that kind of behavior should not be placed in a management position responsible for other employees. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen trying to process what I was reading. Canceling a wedding was apparently not enough for her. She had decided to try sabotaging my promotion too. My first reaction was honestly confusion. Not anger. Just confusion about how she thought this would work. Mark let me read the entire email. It was not short either. Aisley had written several paragraphs describing me as aggressive, unstable, and supposedly capable of intimidating behavior during arguments. She implied that promoting someone like that into a supervisory role could create a hostile environment for other employees. If someone did not know the background, the email sounded serious. But the problem with claims like that is they only work if there is some history supporting them. And there was not. Mark leaned back in his chair and asked the obvious question. Do I need to be concerned about any of this? I told him exactly what had happened. No dramatics, no exaggeration. I explained the wedding argument, the $180,000 demand, the canceled engagement, and the fact that she had left the house angry 2 nights earlier. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked something very practical. Do you have the messages from that night? Luckily, I did. Blocking her had stopped the flood of calls, but the earlier messages were still in my phone. I handed it over and let him scroll through them. The tone made things pretty clear. They were not messages from someone afraid of an aggressive partner. They were messages from someone furious that they did not get their way. Accusations. Insults. A few threats about how I would regret humiliating her. Mark read several of them and handed the phone back. Then he sighed in a way that told me he had already reached a conclusion. He said this was not the first time someone's angry ex had tried something like this. Apparently, it happens more often than people think when promotions or career changes are involved. The important part for the company was whether there had ever been complaints, disciplinary issues, or behavioral problems connected to me at work. There had not. My record there was clean. He closed the email window and told me something that made the whole situation start looking very different. Attempting to interfere with someone's employment using false accusations can create serious problems for the person making those claims. And since she had sent the message directly to a company operations address, there was now a permanent record of it. At that point, I assumed the situation would simply stop there. My promotion review continued normally. The email from Qley was documented, my explanation was noted, and the company moved on with the evaluation process. What I did not expect was that her attempt to interfere would start creating problems on her side instead. About 4 days later, I received another message from Leon. This time the tone was very different. He asked if it was true that Qley had contacted my employer. Apparently, she had been telling people about it like it was some kind of victory. From what he said, she was framing it as standing up to me after I supposedly mistreated her. That alone was strange, but things escalated quickly after that. One of the people she bragged to worked in the same dental clinic network where she was employed as a lab technician. Not the same office, but the same corporate system. Information travels fast in places like that. Eventually, someone in management at her clinic heard about the situation and decided to look into it. From their perspective, one of their employees had contacted an outside company and sent a serious accusation about someone's behavior. That kind of thing creates risk for any employer. So Qley was called into a meeting with her supervisor and someone from HR. They asked her directly whether she had sent the email. She said yes. Then they asked if there had been any police report, formal complaint, or legal case related to the accusations she made. There had not. From what Leon later told me, the conversation ended up being very short after that. Her employer did not want their company connected to a situation where an employee was sending unverified accusations to outside businesses during a personal dispute. A few hours after that meeting, Qley was released from her position. Just like that. The attempt to damage my career had ended up costing her own job instead, and the fallout from that decision was only starting. I did not hear directly from Qley after that, which honestly made sense. If someone tries to sabotage your career and it backfires badly enough to cost them their own job, contacting you again is probably not high on their priority list. What I did hear about came through other people. Leon called me about a week after everything happened and gave me a quick update on how things were unfolding on her side. Losing the job had clearly not been part of Qley's plan. Apparently, she had gone into that HR meeting expecting a warning at most. Instead, she walked out unemployed. The dental clinic network did not want to be involved in a personal conflict that included written accusations sent to another company. According to Leon, the situation had started spreading through her social circle pretty quickly. That is the problem with dramatic decisions. The story eventually reaches people who ask inconvenient questions. Some of her friends asked the obvious one. Why would you contact his employer in the first place? Others apparently asked if there had actually been any police report or legal issue connected to the accusations she made. When the answer to those questions turned out to be no, the tone around her started changing. What she had framed as standing up to me began looking more like a revenge move that backfired. Meanwhile, my situation went in the opposite direction. The promotion decision was finalized the following Monday. Mark called me into his office again and told me the company was moving forward with placing me into the supervisory role overseeing maintenance scheduling for several facilities. More stable hours, higher salary, less emergency driving in the middle of the night to repair failing systems. So in the span of about 10 days, the situation had flipped completely. The wedding was canceled. The relationship was over. She had lost her job after trying to interfere with mine, and I had just been promoted. I did not celebrate the situation or enjoy the fallout on her side, but it did confirm something important. The moment she turned a personal disagreement into an attempt to damage my career, the consequences stopped being under her control. The last piece of the situation happened about 2 weeks after everything fell apart. Up until then, I had not heard directly from Qley since the night she stormed out of the house. Blocking her number had kept things quiet, and honestly, I expected that to remain the case. But separating lives after 3 years together always requires at least one final logistical step. Her belongings were still in my house. Clothes, shoes, cosmetics, some furniture she had bought for the spare room. Nothing complicated legally, but still enough that it needed to be handled properly. So I sent a message through email instead of unblocking the phone number. I kept it very simple. I told her she could come collect the rest of her things on Saturday morning. I would be home, and the process could be quick and straightforward. She responded a few hours later with a short reply agreeing to the time. Saturday morning, she arrived with a friend in a small rental van. The difference in her attitude compared to the night of the argument was obvious. No shouting, no accusations, no dramatic speeches. Just quiet and very focused on getting her things packed. We barely spoke. She moved through the house collecting boxes and bags while her friend carried them out to the van. The entire process took about 40 minutes. At one point, she paused in the living room and looked around the house for a few seconds. I could not really tell what she was thinking, but she did not say anything about it. Eventually, the last box went out the door. Before leaving, she said one thing. She said she had not expected things to turn out the way they did. I told her neither of us probably expected that 3 weeks earlier. Then she left. The house was quiet again after the van drove away. Looking back now, the strange part is how one very simple decision ended up changing everything. Canceling the wedding felt like a straightforward boundary at the time. But once she tried to turn that disagreement into an attack on my career, the situation moved into territory she could not control anymore. In the end, the wedding never happened. The relationship ended. She lost the job she had worked years to build. And my life moved forward in a direction that honestly looks more stable now than it did when we were still planning that $180,000 weekend. Bye-bye.